Showtime.
It's about that time.
Let's go.
You're right where you need to be. This is GCOM Radio.
Hardest radio station on the planet. Yeah.
Powered by Lyfeblood.com.
We certified.
And hosted by Nova Phoenix.
Give them that flavor.
How are you doing, everybody? This is Nova Phoenix. I'm your host on GCOM Radio on iHeartRadio. We got a special interview for you today, as I said, amongst all the others that I'm working on currently. And you folks know that I've been talking about housing every now and then. And I found this lady on Twitter. Twitter is a great site, regardless of what Elon is doing. And she is definitely in the housing and that fights for folks that are trying to have affordable housing in New York City. And this lady's here, and we got together, and it's finally happening. And I like just to say, her name is Leah, right?
Leah
Goodridge. All right. She's the managing attorney for Housing Policy. She served as a tenant member on the NYC Rent Guidelines Board, which determines annual rent levels for regulated apartments. She is a guest speaker on housing in a variety of different universities. She's won many, many awards, and she's penned an essay called, as I say, Professionalism as a Racial Construct for the UCLA Law Review. And that's an interesting, I Googled that, and I'm like, I got to get into that. That's an interesting topic. But I would like everyone, let's welcome Miss Goodridge. How are you, ma'am? Let's go.
Hi, how are you? Yay, how are you? I'm very happy to be here to talk all things housing.
Yes, all things housing. And
all things housing and also professionalism. Perfect. So
yes, and it comes with professionalism. They kind of like overlap and they deal with each other in more ways than one. So please tell me, I did say a little bit about your background, but please be my guest. Tell me about yourself.
So I am from New York. I was born and raised in Brooklyn. I grew up in Brownsville, Brooklyn, which means I know how to fight which means I know how to fight in all senses of the word. I went to college upstate New York and then went to law school at UCLA in California. And in the 3 years that I was away, and then when I came back, it was finally time. I was one of those, like, I don't want to live at home. I want to have my own apartment. And it was just terrible. Like the housing. Well, first of all, I was unemployed. That's number one.
Okay.
And even looking for something, it was just terrible. The rent prices were very high. And so after a number of years, I started working as a tenants' rights attorney. And I worked for the last 10 years. I've worked in the nonprofit sector in called legal services, free legal services, in the tenants' rights unit, and moved up the ranks there. I started as a staff attorney, and now I'm managing attorney. And it's a pretty interesting world. It could be its own show, being a tenants' rights attorney. But then apart from that, the actual work that we do, we're basically on the front lines of the housing crisis.
Wow.
Yeah.
And that's why we're talking.
Yeah.
New York has come a long way. I remember, I'm not going to say my age, but probably everybody else on the show, I kind of mentioned it before, but I've seen the transition, not just transition, but the mutations or the different pathways that New York has taken in terms of residents. And it's very different from how it was in the 1980s. So now we're here. What happened? Please tell me.
Well, first of all, even before then, I think one of the things that's often missing in the conversation about the housing crisis is the fact that we do have this behemoth legacy of slavery, of redlining, of discrimination, because that ties into the fact of why certain neighborhoods look the way they do in New York City, and people of color, specifically Black people, being shut out. So we've had a history of that in New York City. And let me take a quick detour to say, I have also advocated for reparations. And one of the things the barriers in New York City is when you talk about it, a lot of people will respond and say, well, what do we need it for? It's a liberal, progressive city. So that's a whole different conversation. But, there's people have actually, more than one have actually said, well, even if we had slavery, it was probably like kind, gentle slavery. I'm not kidding. The things that people say, the
Wow,
things
people
that
still think
say,
that in 2022.
I know. I'm
Nice.
like, what is this? So, yeah,
Could you
so
please
all
be
of that
so
is a
bad? Could you
lie.
just pick the cotton a little bit?
It just, it wasn't like Georgia or Alabama. Like, oh God, it was very violent history in New York City.
Of course.
So, I say all of that to say we have a long history of just very historical and systemic barriers to do with property and housing. Even Central Park, that used to be a specific village for formerly enslaved Black American families.
Right.
And they were forced out to build Central Park. It was called Seneca Village.
Right.
And so now we have today, you mentioned the 1980s. The 1980s was also a very interesting time because that was also the time when a lot of social services, a safety net, were being cut off by the Reagan administration and Reaganomics.
Good old Ed Koch.
Yeah.
Ed
And,
Koch.
then after that, we've certainly had building up of New York City and development, but at the expense of the local residents. So
Right.
sure, you have many neighborhoods that have been built up and have been developed and look very nice and swanky, but the local residents have been pushed out.
Right, because New York has always, it is the financial capital of the world. That's no doubt about that. But New York at the same time was also a home for a variety of different classes. Of course, the rich were always here, Upper East Side, the different neighborhoods in New York. But you also had a strong middle class, and of course, you had the underclass. We all kind of mixed up there. So there were places for people to live and work their way up the social ladder. But now that seems to be disappearing. So
yeah, and let me speak to that. It's always the job market in New York City is strong, and it's always has been seen as like, this is a place you can make it here, you can make it anywhere. You come, you get a job, you can make it. But let me tell you something. In my line of work as a tenants' rights attorney, one of the things I see consistently is that if you have a decent average salary job, meaning the median salary in New York City, which is around 60, and then you lose your job and you're not able to pay your rent for a couple of months, things snowball from there.
right.
And a lot of those folks end up being in my office because once you get evicted from an affordable apartment in New York City, it is incredibly difficult to find an equally priced apartment or a lower priced apartment. And so you can't find it, and then you're just wavering around. You're bouncing around, you're living with other people, or you get pushed out, or you get evicted and you end up in the shelter system sometimes. So that's what I get to see about how and there are many people that are in my office that, had jobs, something happened, meaning systemic, they lost their jobs or something, and then it just snowballed from there. And because the market is so vicious, the housing market, meaning that it's not easy to find another affordable apartment, they're just priced out. That's what happens.
Now, I remember that, in my hunt for apartments over the years, and, reading up on how we can find affordable housing and what are the rights of the tenant, even what are the rights of the landlord. You got to know all that information as, a New York City citizen. But, I remember reading up and they were saying that rent should be 25% of your salary. That in no way is reality. Like rent now is like half. Like what happened here, and why is it kind of like the door's blown open on that?
Yeah, the specific term in housing language is called rent burdened, and so we have more than half of New Yorkers being rent burdened in some form, and it is atrocious. What happens is that the housing prices are entirely too high. We do have several types of housing in New York. I just want to go quickly into them. We have rent stabilized.
And by the way, that is my cat. Always chimes in at the right time. Thank you, Kitty. Thank you. Okay, go ahead.
Hey, I have two, so I love cats. I love cats.
Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
One thing I love about cats is like they're not like if you get love from a cat, they really love you.
Yes.
A dog would be like, you can do anything, you just exist, and a dog will come and show you. A cat is like when they show you love, they love you. So
they'll show that attention, and they definitely will show you when they don't want love. You get away from me. My cat is like that. He'll be nice to you, and then he'll say, "Okay, get away from me. Leave me alone."
I'm done with you now.
I'm done with you now.
Yeah.
But continue. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
That's right. So we have many different types of housing on the market in New York City. So one is rent regulated housing, and it is exactly like it sounds. It's regulated by a body, which is the Rent Guidelines Board. And so that means that if you live in a rent regulated apartment, and I'll give you an example of rent stabilized, when it's time to renew your lease, generally in a private market apartment, a landlord can increase the rent to whatever they would like. Regulated means that that's regulated, and the landlord can only increase it to how much that Rent Guidelines Board says they can increase it by. So the Rent Guidelines Board might say you can only increase it by 2% or by 5% for a 1 or 2 year lease. So that's a rent regulated apartment. Another type of housing is public housing, and that is housing that is owned and operated by the city. And here in New York, that's called New York City NYCHA, New York City Housing Authority. I've done many of those cases I can speak to. So we have public housing, rent regulated housing. We also have another form of subsidized housing, which would be project-based Section 8 or project-based apartments. Those are owned sometimes by HUD and other government agencies.
Right.
And then we have private market apartments. Those are just on the private market, like I described.
Right.
And let me just also say, they're Mitchell-Lamas, they're co-op. You also have co-ops, of course. You have Mitchell-Lamas. I grew up in a Mitchell-Lama co-op in Brownsville.
Right.
So that was
definitely Rochdale Village is a Mitchell-Lama. Shout out to Rochdale Village.
Yeah. Shout out to Jemison Gorman. Yeah, that's
what's up.
Listen, I actually really loved where I grew up. It was a very well-kept premises.
Sure, yes.
And we had like a huge garden, and the building was welcome, and all the families. The thing about it is it was a very huge development, and all of the families knew each other. So, well, for the most part, at least in my building, we all knew each other's business, and it was just like a very communal.
And why I don't even know why Mitchell-Lama hasn't expanded, because it's a great idea.
I know. I mean, that's another conversation.
Yeah, that's a whole other deal.
And that's the thing. I mean, look, I'm a tenants' rights attorney, and I'm all about tenants' rights. And there's a huge debate about, stop pushing people into home ownership. Everyone doesn't need to buy a house or doesn't need to buy something. But I also think there's another worthy discussion about when we're talking about producing housing, what type of housing, and some of it should offer ownership. That's another.
Yeah. I mean, I think, and one thing that they don't do is rent to own. I think that's a great idea, because there are people that rent for years, decades, and they never have an opportunity to own a home. And it's not the matter that people are not making money to own a home. They're making money to pay the rent, but they haven't had the opportunity to save enough to put down as a down payment for a home. So I don't know why the rent to own option is not on the table when it comes to New York City housing.
There has been a recent proposal. I forget, I don't want to say the wrong council member, but there actually have been proposals about that fairly recently to expand that. I don't want to say, I don't want to say the wrong council member, then someone's like, that's my proposal. So but
that's such a great idea. Why not?
Yeah, there is, yes. But yeah, those are the different types of housing that's on the market in New York City. And so just to get back to the larger question of how we get here to
Right.
astronomical rent, one of the questions that we have to ask ourselves, right, is what are the forms of regulation, really, for the apartments that are existing right now on the market? Because it is a huge fight being regulated. First of all, there are only a handful of states that even have rent stabilization, only a handful. And those states fight to get it off. They don't want it, including in New York. I've been part of lawsuits in my capacity as a rent guidelines board member pertaining to the rent regulatory status, right? And so that is a huge fight. And it is something that I think that we need to pay more attention to and put more energy into fighting to keep in terms of regulating the apartments that are on the market and making sure that they are stabilized and that their rent is stabilized. So that's one key. The other is there's a larger conversation about who really should have the responsibility of providing housing. So right now, it is largely the way that New York City and many other cities approach it. It is largely private developers. They go through the City Planning Commission, which I'm on, and they have these proposals. I want to build this building of say 100 units, and they mostly they're funding it themselves with some government help. That ends up being a big fight because sometimes when they want more from the city, more funding to fund subsidized apartments, they don't get it. And so there's a huge fight when they are in control of those developments that pass through. Because at the end of the day, they're all about, it's going to be profits over people, right? And so there's a huge question about who should be in control and who should be spearheading, addressing, providing more apartments, addressing the, I won't even say housing shortage, but just addressing the fact of how we're providing more apartments. And so if it's by government, obviously that's the way that it should be. This is what government is supposed to provide for its citizens.
Right. I mean, and we're going to get to that too, because I found an article talking about the quote unquote housing shortage, and it seems like we may not be having a housing shortage here in New York. But the other thing with these new developments that are popping up, they're available for folks that make like this low income housing. And there are many times where I see all these new developments popping up and I'm pulling over my car and I'm like, man, let me check this out. And I'm like, okay, what's the requirements? And I'm seeing, okay, a nice house, 2-bedroom, 3-bedroom, 4, that's great. And then my eyes scan over to how much you should make in order to be eligible. And it says 25,000 to 35,000, 45,000. I'm like, okay, that's great.
Yeah.
I don't have a problem with that. But I don't make that. On paper, I can talk about it, but I make a decent amount of money. So, I don't qualify. Where are the affordable housing for people that are middle income?
Oh, so actually in New York City, there's a huge, so let me describe a little bit of background. Because I actually thought you were going the opposite way. There is actually a lot of housing, and that's actually a contentious debate. There's a lot of housing. A lot of the housing starts at $78,000 all the way going to 6-figure incomes in New York City. And that's a huge debate about whether that should even be considered affordable housing. I'm active on Twitter, which is where we found each other. By the way, my Twitter handle is Leah from Brooklyn. Okay. And I posted some apartments. One of them was in East Flatbush. It's a studio. $2,431 for a studio. And I believe the starting salary that they wanted was like $78,000. Now, so that, how?
Leah, how?
Let's get into it. I'm gonna give this. I'm a lawyer by trade, so I'm gonna give this different. I'm gonna approach different angles of this.
I understand this.
Any different angles, okay? Let me just start with the one angle, right? The gentrification angle. One angle is that truly, for affordable, like, is that truly affordable rent, number one? But is that truly even appropriate to have the incomes be 78,000 for affordable apartments when the purpose of these apartments being built and being in the market is to address the housing crisis of lower and moderate income people being pushed out now?
Yeah, low
Let's
income for
provide
who?
another angle. The other angle is some people will say, but that is moderate. In New York City in particular, that is middle income, that is moderate income, because it's different from, say, like the Midwest or in the South where the salaries might be lower. And so in New York City, the salaries are going to be inflated because blah, 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 blah. This is what some people say. And I'm just providing all of it, and then I'll provide my assessment at the end. Okay, so that's one, right? But I'm on the City Planning Commission, and we had a project that came through, and the contention was that they were promised to include incomes for moderate income, like how we're discussing.
All right.
And instead, the final project was just the lower income bands, right?
Okay.
And the residents were upset. They said, it was in Midtown, and they were saying you need to include higher income bands, and not necessarily six figures, but you need to include higher income bands, because what about the teachers? What about the firefighters? What about the people who literally work for the city who have these jobs? They need to have homes too.
That's right. That's right. Blue collar workers
pushed out as well. So there's that perspective. Okay. And I don't think it's an evil perspective. I do think that because we are a very small and scrunched up city, and because the little bit that developers give of affordable housing tends to be so small, literally it can be 25 to 35%, that when you have the bulk of those, or even those small percentages being the middle income, that's where it gets problematic. Because then I think the question becomes, well, by providing these higher income brackets, are you really just contributing to gentrification in your attempt to address the housing crisis?
Right, because I have it written down. I actually wrote down one of the apartments that you have on Twitter. They say in Brooklyn, a 2-bedroom, and you said really is a 1-bedroom, was $2,400, about $2,400. The eligibility band was one person, 83,349 to 121,420. For two persons, it would be 84,000. And low and high, 138,000, and the other one is 105,000 to 138,000.
And mind you, we're just talking about renting, right? We're just talking about, because when we're talking about housing, this is it's a big piece. New Yorkers, more than 2/3 it's a renter city, more than 2/3 are renters. But we're not even talking about home ownership. We're just talking about renters.
Right.
And this is what it looks like. It's hard to get something. And when you finally do get these apartments, they're out of reach for many people. And even for the people, and I also posted, even if you did make, right, the 78K, because this is another part of the conversation. By the time taxes are taken out.
That's what I was about to say. This is working on gross.
By the time you pay that $2,400, and your bi-weekly paycheck is around $2,400. By the time, if you have a young child, by the time you pay for daycare, by the time you pay for groceries, by the time you just pay for just other expenses,
private school, cars,
whatever it is, cars, transportation,
college
you don't
debt.
have that much left. And we're not even talking about saving for retirement. That's another thing.
That's what
most Americans are not saving for retirement the way that we should, because, and part of it, we need to have this conversation, because this is what we're spending our money on, housing. Who can save for retirement when you're trying not to get evicted? And so all of this is, this is all part of the conversation. I don't think that when we have affordable housing that we should be including these six-figure salaries. I do think that that's a very worthy conversation. However, I will say that even when you have the higher salaries, like the 78,000, even those for the rents to match them, by the time you really take out what a normal person will spend their money on, you still don't have much left.
That's right.
You still don't have much left.
And that's the fight. That's the fight, trying to say, well, you're working off a gross, not off the net. And it's really, I have all these other bills. So how am I affording $2,400? Like, let's be honest here. And then the other thing is, the funny thing that's happening is that more of these luxury rentals, high rises are going up. And it was an agreement between the developers and the city to have a certain percentage of these units will be for a lottery. So the lottery would run and people would win. But this is the other thing. Say that person who won the lottery leaves for whatever reason. Now, the catch is, it's not like they give it that same rent to, or whatever chosen amount on that lottery goes to another family at that rate. That rate goes right back up to market rate. So in their eye, they satisfied whatever requirements that was asked of them from the city. Now that family's no longer there, they brought that right back up, and then it's like it never existed. Because I had a friend that won a lottery, and actually two people I knew that won lotteries
in New York.
In New York, and this is the funny thing. I knew someone years ago that won a lottery. They lived in a old high rise right across the street from Grand Central Station. Nice, okay. Right? Nice, yeah. Right? Pretty cool. But then when I went to
how much it was,
I can't lie. I forgot the amount, but he was able to get his wife and his kid at the time in there. This was probably like 12, 15 years ago. And when I went to go visit him, I looked around and I'm like, well, it's great that you won this lottery to live in affordable, in an affordable unit, but you're in 42nd Street, East 40. There's nothing affordable around here. There's nothing affordable. Corner stores. Then you have D'Agostino's. D'Agostino's, folks, if you don't know, outside of New York, is like a high-end a supermarket. So it's like, yeah, you live in affordable housing, but at the same time, really, the surrounding neighborhood doesn't fit what you make. So now you have to go outside your neighborhood to get, to buy, groceries that's going to fit your budget. That's the other kind of like problem that people have if they were to win these lotteries in high-end neighborhoods.
This comes up a lot in the debate, and there is a debate of where to place homeless shelters, where they should be built. And there was a huge debate under the de Blasio administration, and continues to be. On Adams' administration is fairly new, but there's always been a debate. But one of them was, placing homeless shelters in neighborhoods of concentrating them so that they are in neighborhoods where the people who are in the homeless shelters are from.
Yeah.
And then there was part of that debate was, no, they should be placed in. Why aren't we placing them in more wealthy parts of town so that they can, and this is a part that I don't like about the language, they can bear the burden of having a homeless shelter, which in of itself is very problematic language. Right. And part of that conversation was, well, they need the community staples of being close to their family, number one, and being close to affordable, grocery prices, schools, everything that would make their family intact. And so this is where a lot of what you're saying, and I use the example of the placement of homeless shelters, but it's a larger, obviously, conversation about affordability and how it isn't just about the exact location, but the actual neighborhood. If you're close to schools, you might live in Grand Central, but if your child goes to school in the Bronx or in Brooklyn, I mean, it's an added strain, and I think that a lot of folks might not think about that part.
Right.
I want to quickly say the term luxury. I've had someone bring this up on Twitter, and I didn't realize that this isn't widely understood. But in New York, at least, when we say luxury and we're talking about luxury housing, because there's this whole hashtag on TikTok about Black girl luxury, which I love. And so just kind of like reclaiming like we deserve luxury. And
Sure.
so some folks have messaged me as like, what's wrong when you say, because people housing apps say we don't want this luxury housing. And so some folks have messaged me like, what's wrong with luxury housing? What's wrong? What's wrong? And they're not from New York. That's one thing. But just to describe it for anyone who isn't from New York, when you hear tenant advocates or housing advocates and they're complaining about luxury housing, it isn't at all about the comforts and having nice housing. It is that this specific term, especially in real estate lingo, is specific to signal those tall, high-rise, modern, sleek, swanky buildings that often have very unaffordable rent. And, they're not rent regulated for the most part. And they're not rents that local residents who live near them can afford. So
Like
when we
downtown
say
Brooklyn.
luxury, it isn't to say someone doesn't deserve, like the actual comforts of a nice home. It is to describe a particular type of housing that often is very exclusive to the residents of that area. So just some, I don't want people like, I deserve luxury. I'm like, yes, you do, but that's not what we're talking about.
Yeah,
I
I'm with you.
I didn't realize, I guess it's like a New York term. I don't know. I mean,
People want luxury with affordability.
And let me know, but this is what we mean when we're talking about housing. No one's saying like you should live, I don't know, in
squalor next to them.
And,
Nobody's saying that. They're just saying, it has to be affordable. That's the question. People are probably thinking why I'm in the dark.
Oh, no.
The thing is, I'm so used to, I zone out with the lights off and the computer light. I just forgot to turn on the light, but it's all good. See, everybody can see my face now. Oh, yes. Wow. Because they're probably thinking, why is Nova in the dark by the computer light? Okay.
I didn't even notice.
All right. So this is the next question.
Are you in New York, by the way?
Yes, I am in New York.
Oh,
and
okay,
guess where I'm from? I'm from Brooklyn, too.
Okay. Oh, well then.
I'm a Queens resident, but born and raised in Brooklyn. So, off of Flatbush. So I know what it is to see the changing face and see how the market is shifting, where you had a variety of different classes living in New York to now where it's become extreme rich and extreme poor. And that's the other thing that's with these what we're seeing in this trend, because what it looks like to me is they're offering affordable housing, and it's like 25 to 35,000, all these. And of course, you're going to be the person that's working at McDonald's or working at a fruit stand. It just seems like to me the extreme rich needs a place for folks that are going to make their beds or serve them the coffee. That's what it looks like to me. As far the gap is so wide and so distinct, who else is going to be living here but those two classes?
And the other thing, I try to be wary of using the term even working class, because there are a lot of people who aren't working, and people who are working and they're relying on public assistance, and so they are also shut out of this debate as well, because we're talking about starting from 25,000, and there are a lot of people who make much less than that.
Right.
Home health aides, delivery, and by the way, a quick detour. I don't think a lot of people understand delivery, like DoorDash, like the people who do this mostly full time. These are the folks who held up the city. These are literally the folks when the pandemic, in the height of the pandemic, these are the folks who made sure that everyone got their meals correctly when everyone didn't want to go outside. Right. These are the taxi drivers. These are the folks who held up the city.
Right.
And they're hard jobs too.
Right.
Especially, I had no idea that delivery workers have to deal with robberies like all the time, and people stealing their bikes. That's a whole different thing.
Yeah.
But that's a quick detour to say that we really need to think about, when we're thinking about housing, where are these folks? Where, how can we provide for these people, right? How can
Right.
we provide for folks, and then not even just starting from 25,000, but people who make less than that. And
Right.
right now, it is difficult with the affordable housing that's available, because much of it will start, not even from 25, it'll start from higher than that. And, like I said, if we had more room and we had a lot more options for affordability and affordable apartments, yeah, I think we can have this conversation about incorporating moderate and middle income. But I think the problem is that, first of all, the incomes that are being used to determine what is middle income is already high. It's higher than it's supposed to be, because it's including parts of outside of New York City. So
Right.
it's actually a higher income bracket than it should be, so it's just a lot that we haven't been doing as a city that we should be. And I'll just speak, I know there's gonna be a question of like, well, what are you doing? You're on the City Planning Commission, you're a tenants vice president. So just to provide people with a little bit of background, because I think a lot of people don't know this, because I think I probably am one of the more, or probably the most active person who's on the commission on Twitter. So a couple of people have asked me, they think like there's one commissioner, like some city agencies. There's actually 13. There's 13 commissioners, and I'm one of the 13. And there's actually a chair. I am not the chair. And so I say that to say I'm one of the 13, and I bring up a lot of these viewpoints while we're in the meetings. I joined the commission and I was appointed by the public advocate last December, and had my first meeting this January in 2022.
Okay, great.
And, I bring up a lot of these viewpoints. I push for racial equity. And as a tenants' rights attorney, obviously, this is my daily work. This is what the commission meetings are twice a week, every 2 weeks. And my day job is as a tenants' rights attorney, basically fighting gentrification.
Right.
What
I don't know how do you effectively deal with gentrification, because at the end of the day, it's greed. And it leads into this next thing. I read a New York Daily News article. They're saying that state developers, as I'll say, were indicted for collecting more than $1 million in property tax benefits while collecting sky-high rents on affordable rental units. And these developers own like 6 Brooklyn buildings.
I didn't even see that one.
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah, that was crazy. And also that there is an underreporting of affordable housing in New York. Rent regulator, they said about 7,000 to 8,000 units. And it leads me to believe that, this is not something. And it's also the Economic Policy Institute reports that CEO compensation has gone up 940%. compared to workers that have only gone up 12%. And it seems like, to me, when you couple these two situations, that the housing issue doesn't seem like something that accidentally just ran away from people. Like, oh my God, things got expensive.
It happened now.
It just seems very deliberate from a lot of different bad actors that have caused this, that have manipulated the housing market to be the way that it is currently.
Yeah, and I have to mention, because you kind of touched on this, but right now we have about 90,000 vacant apartments. So that way you touched on like whether we even have a housing shortage, but it needs to be stated over and over again that we have 90,000 vacant apartments on the market that have just been held hostage by landlords.
Okay, so maybe my numbers are wrong, but did I get it wrong?
It's a big conversation, but none of this is something that we woke up with one day and said, oh, look, we were in a housing crisis. This is decades of disinvestment. This is decades of bootstrap policy. And we continue to have and I've been bringing this up, but it's a lot of racialized displacement as well. You have in many historically Black neighborhoods in New York City, being pushed out. We have this, it's being called the new Great Migration. where you have a lot of Black residents moving from New York City to down south, Charlotte. And I want to just say as part of the anti-Blackness and the racism, we can't just move anywhere. People when you Google these lists, like, where are Americans moving to? And I Google them, and it'll be like Colorado Springs, like all this. I'm like, we can't live there. Like half the places, like West Virginia, like, listen, it's like we only have a few sprinklings of places to live now. So it's like, you have sundown towns. And so the long and short of it is, you have a lot of Black residents leaving New York City, including many in my family, because, like I mentioned before, they're done with the rental market. They want to own. Some of them have been working for the city for 30 years and still cannot afford to own a home. And even when they can afford something, I love living in a Michelama co-op, but listen, everyone doesn't want to live in a co-op. Some people want their own home, where they come outside with their yard, pick up paper, space, not attached to the next house.
Right.
That's a dream for many people. So it's not, as you say, an accident. It is the result of decades of bad policies and ignoring. It's not even, I mentioned racialized displacement. It's not even ignoring, it's literally implementing policies that result in racialized displacement and then not doing anything about it.
Yeah, I'm gonna put on my tin hat crazy conspiracy theory.
New York City government has caused fibroids. What have they done?
For folks that listen to the show, I go on my speculations, right? So my thought is, New York was New York, and from the 1920s, 1910s, and we see the old black and white, jittery, shaky footage of what it was like in New York City back in the day. It was like 95% white, right? Now, all of a sudden, as the decades go into the 50s to the 60s, the 70s, you have the migration of Black folks from the South trying to escape racism. And they figure that living in these modern urban centers, they can turn a new leaf and start a new chapter in their life. And then in the late 60s to 70s, you have a lot of the Caribbean folks that moved up into New York. And all of a sudden, not just Black folk, but a lot of East Indians and Asian folks and, folks from the Middle East. I hate using that term, but quote unquote Middle East. And, we have all these people migrating into New York. And all of a sudden you have a New York that's, oh my God, good, predominantly BIPOC urban center, where half the population is white and the other half is, again, BIPOC, Black, and the largest demographics is Black folks, 25%, Latinos, 27% or something or other. And then you have, of course, all the others, like, as I said before, Asians, East Indians, and such and so forth. And they vote overwhelmingly Democrat. And a lot of what New York was supposed to be, of how the old gen, it's not that long ago, 1920s, 1930s, a lot of the old guard that's also passed on the baton to their new generations. Like, wait a second, oh my God. So eventually the people that come in, they start from at the bottom of the economic ladder, and they start as people that are doing the beds and throwing out the garbage and all these things. And eventually they take the low income jobs, but eventually their kids that are born here get an education and they start climbing that social ladder. Now they become police officers. Now they become firefighters. Now they're into politics. Oh my God. Now they're getting as council members and they're mayors and they're, oh my God. And now it is undeniable that their positions of power there are being taken by folks that there was no intention for that to happen. And the only eventual it will lead into getting into, again, higher positions of power. I'm talking about senator, and then all of a sudden you're dealing with governor, and now all of a sudden you have half a city that is literally the financial mecca of the world, that now they have to cater to a lot of the interest from folks that they look down upon. Now, of course, they're not going to just start throwing people out by the bootstraps and saying, get these, Black people out of here, get these other folks out of here. That's crazy. It looks bad. It's bad optics. But what they can do is make the city expensive, where people have no choice other than to just leave the town. And now, and I'm not saying everyone has to leave. Not every single Black or POC person would have to leave, but enough where now the numbers, as far as the voting numbers, dwindles enough where they don't have that voting power. Now things can sway back into the hands of folks that traditionally the power has always been seated in. And essentially I'm talking about white supremacy here. So what do you think?
Oh, I'm glad you're bringing this up, because this is a conversation that I feel like a lot of Black families are having at the dinner table about what the hell is going on with New York, and this specific line of analysis, that it's intentional. Why is it happening? Is what is a conversation. I think this is what's going on. I think that the actual racialized displacement is something that's happening not just in New York, but this is part of what the housing crisis is. It's happening in California. You have a lot of folks moving from California to Texas to Arizona, and a lot of those folks are, there's a huge Latino population. Child said Latinx on Twitter. People like, who? They came, they're like, excuse me? So I don't even say Latinx, I'm like Latino population.
However they describe.
Latin
and
population.
If they want to come up with their own name, that's fine. That's cool.
Latin.
Right.
It's a larger conversation about and this is why I've been talking about the housing crisis, and adding, because people like to talk about it in terms of income, but that's just one very small piece of it. We're really looking at racialized displacement. As to the why, I don't know.
Yeah, to me, I always boil it down to white supremacy.
But I will say that I don't think people well, maybe, who knows, but I want to point out that we are actually in a very historical time in New York City. And I think that because of the pandemic, because we're so distracted, we may not realize it, but I just want to point something out, okay? This is the first time in New York City that we have had a Black mayor, the second Black mayor, okay? Black mayor at the same time as a Black city council speaker, that's Black mayor Eric Adams. Black city council speaker, that's Adrienne Adams.
Black AG.
Black
Attorney General
Letitia James.
Shout out to Letitia James.
Black public advocate Jamani Williams.
Right.
Andrea Stewart Cousins, the first majority leader. Black oh Lord. What is his name?
Black
what is his name? Was from the Bronx. Oh goodness.
Oh my God.
I know, but it's like, it's on the tip of my tongue. I can't believe this is how you know I'm not really political.
It's all good. It's all good.
But let me
also, I also got
list.
a name, Black police commissioner,
Black
woman police
commissioner. I want to just point out that just a couple of years ago, we had de Blasio and Cuomo, you know how they had their beefs and they're fighting. I mean, this was a white male dominated industry in terms of even who led the city council. It was a big deal for Melissa Mark-Viverito to be the, I think she was the first Latina city council speaker. That was a huge deal. It was a huge deal a couple of years ago when it was Christine Quinn. And so I just want to, but now that we have today, where we have many Black people in positions of power, I want to point that out. But then we also have a lot of people of color for the first time. I think we have the first Muslim city council. I want to say it was the first Muslim city council member. I don't want to get it wrong, but it's a lot of, I know, but it is just a lot of like firsts, right? And people are being open. I think, we also have the first open gay Black man in the state Senate. think that was
Yes.
Jabari Brisport, I want to say. I mean, it's just a lot of like firsts.
A lot go
right,
ahead. I'm sorry.
and it's a lot of firsts. And right now, in terms of the city council, we do have
Her name is Shahana Hanif,
okay,
the first
yes,
Muslim woman elected to the New York
yes,
City Council.
yes,
Okay.
yes. And I'm sure I'm missing out a lot of other, I'm
Sure.
sure I'm missing out a lot of other firsts,
Sure.
right? I'm sure we got like first Asian something that I'm missing out because we don't have that many Asian, East
Sure.
Asian at least.
Sure. Well, that's all coming into play. But and even though people may, and I have to throw this in, even though people may question some of their ideology, the fact is that these seats are taken by people that are people of color and Black folk. That can switch the ideology that they can be comfortable with, can switch over the.
This is what I want to talk about. This is what I want to talk about. Now, the first part that I want to say is like, we do have a switch in New York City. And this is, for all intents and purposes, a very historical moment, very historical moment in terms of the representation.
Sure, sure.
The second part of it is how is it going to play out with the ideology, right? We have this all the time. We Black folks, we know this, where we have our first Black CEO or something, and we're like, oh Lord, child, I hope you don't fire us, child. I hope you don't fire us. We don't know, like, so. This is but this is a conversation, especially with Black progressives. Mayor Adams is not a progressive, right? No. And he's open about that. A lot of his platform and ideas have been criticized, and rightfully so, by housing advocates, by progressives, about bringing back this whole mantra of really demonizing homeless. And specifically, I think there's a real question of, I always ask this, right? If those folks were white, if the majority of the homeless population in New York City was white, would the approach be the same? And I always ask this of every elected official, right? I don't know if cops would be sent to be arresting people in the subway all the time, homeless people, whoever in the subway. I just, so I think the second part of it is this is a very historical time where we have a lot of representation that we did not have before, and we're having it at the same time. We're having all these firsts at the same time.
Correct.
But how will that actually trickle down into ideology and into change? That's the thing. And I can tell you right now, when we had the reparations talks,
listen,
people don't want to touch it, so I don't know. I mean, there's a pending law right now. I'm very happy that Senator Jabari Brisport and Assembly Member Szilagyi have put this law into place, but other elected officials need to get it to pass it, and that's where we're going to see stuff like that. Is where we're going to see just how progressive New York is, and how these ideologies play out. So
facts, and I say it's a finger snap. It's a decision. It's one term away from that ideology switching, and they're afraid that they might get another Adam Clayton Powell, and they're like, "Oh, Jesus Christ!" Listen. So, and that's why I feel like this ties into housing. Like you, all right, fine, they're here, but reduce their voting numbers enough where they don't have that influence, that power to shift local law, because they're chomping at the bit to try to ramp up the masses' support for more police, all right, and get things going back.
There's a question of whether those budgets can be used for housing, right?
Right.
What if some of that budget is used for housing development?
It ties in. How do we have affordable housing through the massive budget for the NYPD? How do we do that for mental health programs, for job relocation programs, for job education? Because what ties into quote unquote crime, and I think a lot of the major news and media kind of pumps up, again, how do you shift the narrative for people living in the city to invite more cops, is you have to continuously bash them over the head with crime. But the answer is not so simple as, okay, we need more cops, because that doesn't solve the root cause of why there is quote unquote crime. It's poverty. Poverty and crime goes hand in hand. You deal with poverty, essentially you're going to eventually deal with crime. Okay. So again, I don't want to get too off topic, but but again, what can people do to push affordable housing for low income and middle income folks in New York?
Hold your elected officials accountable.
Okay.
Call the mayor.
Great segue.
Okay.
Go ahead.
There is, you know, at the end of the day, elected officials are I think, they are operating under what their constituents want. And I do want to say there are a lot, we've been talking about basically the progressive wing, and I don't want to call it the wing, but the progressive part of the Democratic Party, and then the more moderate part, socialist part. But listen, for all intents and purposes, there are pockets of many of the communities that we've been talking about that are very conservative minded, and they will go to these elected officials' offices and say, I do want more cops, I do want this, right? And those same elected officials need to hear from constituents to say, I want more housing. This is the primary issue for me. And this is an issue that will make me vote you out or in office. And this is what matters to me the most. Where is the affordable housing? There are multiple appointments that these elected officials make, all the borough presidents, the mayor, they appoint people to the city planning commission, which I'm on. They appoint people to the rent guidelines board, which I was on. And so these are the folks who are making the decisions. And so these are things that I don't think enough people know, that this is what you need to push the elected officials on. Who are you appointing to represent us, to speak for us? Because the reality is that in terms of, for example, the commission, it's overwhelmingly developer friendly, which is fine. I'm not anti, I'm pro affordable housing. That's the thing. I want more affordable housing. But there is a large swath, I think, of city planning in general that is just about looking at this as like it's an issue of a housing shortage, and we just need more housing, period, regardless of if it's affordable. I don't agree with that. So I think, the number one thing to push your electeds on is who are they appointing to represent you on these boards? That's the number one thing. Community boards as well. Who are on the community boards? People should join the community boards and speak up. But I will say everyone doesn't. I know me, I've never been part of a community board. Everyone doesn't have time to do it. So the other thing I always tell people to do as I come back to is push your elected officials on who they are appointing, and also push them on speaking up about housing. We need more city council hearings on housing affordability. We need more city council hearings on the ridiculous housing lottery and the ridiculous income requirements and how this is playing out in New York City. $2,400 studios we should not have. And we need to have more electeds taking that on in terms of hearings, in terms of challenging that. And so I think this is something that people should know. And
what about the mayor? What can Mayor Eric Adams do? Because he's our mayor. So what can we do to talk to him to get this more front and center?
I think the first thing is having a collective of a very diverse wing, progressive, of housing advocates to speak to, because I think right now, well, I'll leave that alone. I'll just say I think that more tenant-friendly voices need to be in the room. The second thing is in terms of actual policies, we need to, I've heard the mayor say this a couple of times, sort of like, yes, in my backyard, and we're a city of yes. And that is a specific slogan attached to developers. They call themselves YIMBY, which that's a long story, but what about a YIMBY? Affordable housing in my backyard. We're not having that conversation. And I have seen, a couple of times where the mayor will say, we're bringing affordable housing, but I can tell you, we're not doing what we can and should be doing with that.
And we have to blame, so we have to take some of that accountability, because black folk, but I think that's turning a corner. I think there's a lot of not just black people, but just New York City residents that are now becoming more active in the political process on a local level. and they just have to find a place on where they could get some of that energy and funnel that angst and that anger to the right people in local government. So I feel that happening. I feel people are they're frustrated with what happened on the federal level with, of course, with Trump and this whole bunch of talk. We know what's going on around the country as far as disenfranchising people of their voting rights in a variety of different states. But I think that's only putting the battery in the back of people to say, you know what, if I can't have much of a change on a federal level, this is what I can do on a local level. What legislation have you heard of? I know you mentioned it before. You didn't want to take any of that the credit for some of the legislation that's dealing with affordable housing that you mentioned earlier. Is there anything in particular that people should be aware of that they can back or get behind?
I'm so sorry, but I'm actually having a brain freeze right now on
That's
it.
okay. That's okay.
There have been many in the last couple of years that there have been many big fights, funding the right to counsel. That's a huge issue right now. There's a shortage of funding for right to counsel and attorneys to handle these eviction cases of the city funds. Obviously there are a bunch of warehousing bills, but I think the larger question that people need to get behind is pushing elected officials to understand, because I've seen a bunch of them addressing the housing crisis as an issue of shortage and just saying that long as we bring in more housing and we build more housing, that is the way to address it. And I really think that we need to push them to understand that we need affordable housing now. We don't need to go and bring in more market rate apartments and then wait. If the affordable apartments right now are not affordable, we need to have those conversations about what exactly is going to do to the market when you bring in more market rate.
Listen, I on paper, like I said before, I make decent money, but then when you look at what they're offering, these, the housing market is just unbelievably crazy. And even when it comes to people that live outside of New York and they come in and I'm looking at Bed-Stuy, I'm looking at, Crown Heights, I'm looking at Lefferts Gardens, and I'm seeing about these new houses being built, and these folks are paying out-of-towners $1.5 million for these houses. And as far as ownership, and I'm like, and nothing has changed in the neighborhood. You still dealing with rats, you still dealing with garbage. I'm like, why would you pay? And then you have no backyard, you have nothing. You're just buying property, and you're going to spend $1 million too. If that's the case, I'd rather get a piece of like a house or something like that with a little bit of elbow room. So it amazes me that I don't know what is the attraction. Where you have people paying that much.
People want to, there are a lot of people who we talked earlier about people moving down south into different parts, but for a lot of people, we love the city and we don't want to leave. And this is, and some people can't leave, by the way. They don't have
right. They don't have an option.
So, we try to make do. I don't know about people buying $1 million homes if they can't leave, but I'm just saying that there are a swath of people who don't really have the intention to leave and want to stay. You mentioned this, but there's also Brownsville, where I'm from. Every time I log on that Zillow, can't find anything less than $500K in Brownsville. So, by the time we get to the down payment, the 20% down, it's rough. It's rough.
Yeah.
We've been talking a lot about apartments and renting, but there's also when you're trying to buy a home, how difficult that is. And there is Sony Ma, there are programs through the state, but the market is rough. And when you have like 3.5%, and then you're out, you also have to remember there are a lot of other people who they have the 20%, and sometimes the asking price, They'll outbid you. It's a rough market.
Rough. And then for some of the renters, some of these landlords are asking for like 3 months up front, 4 months. I'm like, what? For what? It's ridiculous. People can't get in. People can't move about. It's nuts. It's so high. I mean, so if you have $25,000, $30,000 saved for rent, you might as well keep that on to put down as a down payment for a home if you have that much in your pocket to give to a landlord.
That's the question. Right? That is the question.
Okay, so where can people get in touch with you as far as trying to find any legislation that deals with housing affordability? How can people do this?
I'm fairly new to Twitter. I just want to add, but it has become my home. So I am the most accessible on Twitter. I tweet a lot about housing every day and just different angles of, what housing looks like. Sometimes I do fun tweets like, where is this house located? So my Twitter handle is Leah from Brooklyn, and I'll spell it out. It's LEAHFROMBKLYN. And so that is my Twitter handle. And so if you're on Twitter, you can follow me there, connect there. My other social media, I'm on, let's say LinkedIn as well as, under my full government name.
Of course.
But I tend not to post about the housing stuff on there. I post about the article that you mentioned before, professionalism. I just want to say though, just to give folks a little sneak peek, I do not ascribe to Black respectability. I am not one. I will cuss you out. No, I have had to cuss a couple people out on Twitter. I am serious. I'm not just going under any different name and logging in and being like, well, I don't feel like your opinion. No. A couple people don't got cussed out, honey. No, I'm serious because developer people are very active on Twitter, and they'll come on there and they'll be like, I just feel like you're stupid and you're dumb. I'm like, what?
Oh, what?
I had to post one of them. I had to post the Emancipation Proclamation. Like, excuse me, we are free. So I say all that to say, be prepared, because I am a firm believer of being my full authentic self. I wrote a whole article about it, about disrupting professionalism.
Because you will get the cussing.
Which quite frankly, we are the only ones held to this standard. Nobody else needs to be professional. That's the whole point of the article. So I'm like, I'm done with it. After June 2020. I know my Black professionals will understand. After June 2020, I was like, it's over. It is over. It's out the window. Everybody gets cussed out. Everybody can get a piece. Everybody can get a piece.
Everybody gonna catch. Somebody gonna catch these words. Somebody gonna catch these words.
So yeah. So I am my full authentic self on Twitter.
Right.
I am my full authentic self in the commission meetings. I am my full authentic self in the courthouse. I am my full authentic self in my office. So there you go.
Right. I'm with you. No, listen, I'm with you, because sometimes people gotta catch those words in the right way. I want to say going exactly to violence, catch these hands, but they're gonna catch these Twitter fingers. They're gonna catch these words.
When they had the Supreme Court hearing and they were acting a fool with Justice Ketanji Brown, she had to sit there. I'm like, no, excuse me, no, this is not that.
She's like, no. You gonna get all parts of me.
I'm like, yeah. Listen, most days I don't actually. I ignore the foolishness. But some days I'll throw some digital uppercuts. Some days.
Because some people deserve it.
I'm responding, and it's 100%. Just to be clear, it's 100% the developer people. It's not like tenants are coming and I'm like, it's really not affordable. Like this developer people. They'll be active and they're like, I actually think that rent should be like, we need to protect the wealthy people. So it's them.
Yeah, I totally.
That's what I'm talking about. That will come on, and I'm like, hey, you can catch a stray. You can catch a stray.
In 20 different ways. This is how we're gonna do it. From professional to you gonna get Leah from Brooklyn.
Yeah.
Yo,
like,
I mean,
like, yeah.
Let me tell you something, and that's what they need. Because they expect it. Now, and my thing is, I'm never don't ever think that you're gonna catch this image where you gonna get all rude and nasty with me, and I'm supposed to, look, oh my God, Miss not Obama, oh my God, Michelle Obama says, when they go low, we go high. Oh, you know what? I understand, I get it, but sometimes they got to catch it. You're like, oh, sorry, I didn't mean to. Yes, and that's all. I'm gonna leave it there.
Gotta let me
All right, so I really appreciate Leah Goodridge for coming on to the show, GCOM Radio, and really explaining what's going on with the housing. Please, people, get in touch with her on Twitter if you have any questions about housing, the rental issues, and she could direct you to the right people. I'm looking forward, Leah, to having you on the show again for any new developments that's happening with housing, to toss questions. And this is necessary because it's just coming to the point where it's you can't ignore it anymore. It can't be just a conversation in the kitchen or the water cooler at a job. People have to do something about it because people are going to be literally living on the streets. It's going to get as bad as what's happening in California and Silicon Valley. So thank you for being on the show. I appreciate it, folks. Check in next week for more stuff that's coming for GCOM Radio. Look out for it. Thank you, Leah. Much love to you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Check it.
You just listened to GCOM Radio, powered by Lyfeblood.com for the global community.
We worldwide, baby.
See you in the next go round. From right here to your town, we out.